Welcome to the Down Dog Athletics Podcast, a competitor's guide to mental health and mastery, your resource for conversations around mental health and the mindsets necessary to master every area of your life. My name is Paul Klingen, and I'm a former Division I athlete that struggled with my mental health until I started yoga, which opened me up to other practices that gave me a balanced approach to my physical and mental health. The goal of this podcast is to inspire others to do the same, train and compete like an athlete, while also having the ability to slow down and practice stillness. When you can do both, you find balance and evolve into a greater version of yourself. What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Down Dog Athletics Podcast, a competitor's guide to mental health and mastery. My name is Paul Klingen, and I am your host. Hope you guys are all settling in, hanging in there. It is a crazy time, obviously, getting to mid-July, and we don't know if we're going to have college football. Hopefully you got a chance to listen to last week's episode with Micah Cooper at Oklahoma State. I'm watching some golf, working on my golf swing, but really it still is so weird right now, and the only thing I can really do is focus on my running. And side note, personal, PR for me, I was super pumped. 13.1 miles, I was able to do it in 1:25:46, and a big thing that helped me with that, I know for certain, is going to be the yoga that I've been doing, both to stay flexible, to make sure specific muscles are activating, and getting really efficient with movement patterns. And if this is something that you want to get into, I've developed 2 different programs for athletes to use to help them both in the gym, whether they're running, so that, like I mentioned, things like flexibility, different injury prevention, muscle activation, strengthening, especially in the core, those don't become an issue. So if you are interested in looking into either of those, I've got Yoga Foundations and also Yoga for Runners. Yoga Foundations is a 6-part video series with 3 sequences, 3 meditations, athletic-based, athletic-minded. The Yoga for Runners is a 7-part video series that targets specific pain points that might keep runners off the street, off the track, off the treadmill. And these, again, are going to be designed to help improve performance. It's going to be done so in a way that makes sense for athletes. So be sure to check that out. Head to downdogathletics.com and see if there's something that works for you. I definitely think anyone looking to increase those markers, like I mentioned, is going to be interested in that. Today I have Dr. Josie Nicholson. She's a licensed psychologist and certified mental performance consultant, which gives her a dynamic skill set in working with athletes. You can think that she has this really cool ability of working with athletes in a mental health clinical setting, but then also being able to give them mental performance tools to increase their free throw percentage or help them throw more strikes versus balls. She joined the athletic health and performance staff at Ole Miss in 2012 and actually found Dr. Nicholson through the Unit3d Podcast that she hosts to support Hilinski's Hope. You might remember the podcast I did with Mark Hilinski in episode 13, where we talked about Tyler Hilinski's tragic death a few years back. And in this podcast, I really loved it. We talk about the spectrum of mental health and why there aren't necessarily good or bad psychological traits when it comes to mental health and performance. It really kind of comes down to what works well for you and in the situation that you're in. She discusses different tools that she uses with her athletes, and especially we dive into hypnosis, which I was really interested in, and how she uses that to help students understand things like their identity. There's a big thing with college athletes, especially, where eventually you hit a spot where you're not going to be playing that sport anymore. So how do you navigate that shift in identity and going into getting a job? You're 23 and you're out in that real world. So I'm really excited to share this podcast with you. This is right smack dab in the middle of what I want this podcast to be about. And so I'm excited to have you guys all have a listen.
Thanks for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. How are things in Oxford, Mississippi today?
Strange. And that's now the new normal, I think.
Yeah. The new normal is definitely one that I was listening to someone else talk about it on a podcast where it was interesting. They were talking about what the potential ramifications would be from a mental health standpoint in the future. And I feel like we have no idea. What do you think is like maybe something that could be 6 months down the road? Or it's just so interesting.
Yeah.
Because 200 years from now, we'll be looking at history books and there's going to be stuff that's written and we're going to be able to see it all unfold now, but it's just such a historic time.
Oh, for sure. And I've encouraged a lot of my friends to I've written a couple of letters to my kids. They're really young. So I'm like, this is what it was like, because they'll be able to, see it in their 6th grade textbooks or whatever. But I think that we have no idea, right? So some of the things that I try not to think too much about it, but I think a lot of loneliness, because we really underestimate how important our connections are. And I'm not talking about like connection with my sister that I haven't been able to see for a while or whatever. I'm talking about the interaction of smiling with a stranger or striking up a conversation with somebody sitting next to me on a bus. Those things we know from research are, people think they don't want that, but come to find out it really impacts our mental health and helps us feel connected to something bigger than ourselves. So I think that the world is exploding and also shrinking for a lot of people.
Yeah, for sure. Is it the limbic system that picks up on those like facial signs and how we read people and how we kind of like interact throughout our environment? Did I have that right?
Yeah, it's kind of complicated, but basically, yeah, it's a very base connection. Very very core to who we are as social beings.
Absolutely. So you work a lot with the athletic department at Ole Miss. Is there a specific team that you prioritize or spend most of your time with?
No, so sometimes I joke about having favorites, but I don't really. So I'm in athletics. So my office is actually attached to what would be the Academic Success Center, right in a corridor there. And basically, I see any individual athlete that wants to be seen. I see a lot of athletes that are referred for a variety of reasons. And then I also work with teams that may request different things, like maybe they want a series, or maybe they just want me to come in and talk about body language or confidence, or these one-offs. But then other teams I can develop a relationship with and go in, and I have my time that I work with them on whatever they need. So it's really a variety of modes that I work with
Yeah,
athletes. Yeah.
that's really cool. Is it easier being within the organization or at the university to have that trust maybe with a specific player or with a specific team, and they find it easier to open up to you?
I can only speak to how I see it at Ole Miss. For me, it's the right fit for Ole Miss. I think it's a lot easier for them to see me as an insider, for me to communicate with them. There's something that makes it not a big deal to come see me when I just like said, hey, walking down the hall, we're going to get some water, So I think that it is easier from that standpoint. For me, I'm a known entity. It's not like, oh, go see Dr. Nicholson down the hall. It's like, go chat with Josie about that. She might have some ideas of how to increase your free throw percentage or whatever it is. I think for some individuals, they want somebody that is outside athletics because they want that distance from, whatever it is they're talking about, or they don't want people to know because the stigma is still really strong. So there's definitely some individual differences, but being part of athletics, I'm part of the team. And so it's easy for coaches to bring me on, and for athletes to just see me as part of the resource, like nutrition or the athletic trainer. I know there are other ways to do it. There's certain universities have liaisons within the counseling center. And they would probably tell you that for them, it's easier. So I just know it works
Yeah,
here.
absolutely. Well, I love you mentioned it's like a resource, just like a nutrition coach, or people are like, hey, I got to go see the physio or the guy who's going to work on my calf because my calf's tight. And if you do have any tips after this for how to increase my free throw percentage, I'm definitely interested.
Got
That's
you.
something that's been struggling since I was in high school. The thing that I'm curious about is you've got a wealth of experience, and I feel like it kind of sits on a trajectory of mental health and the stigma that maybe was much bigger
Mhm.
20 years ago. And I feel like it's getting talked about so much more now, but it still definitely exists. How has that evolved And what would you say has really happened in the last few years that has allowed it to be destigmatized?
So I think that it has evolved out of necessity because, we know also, I'm really big on saying we know from research, but I'm not just making it up. We know that the average college student is coming into college with a level of anxiety, stress, and mental health struggles such as depression um, at a much higher rate than has ever been seen, and that continues to go up. And I think as you talk about these things, as we talk about these things as a society, as we say, it's okay to not be okay, then you're able to talk about these things. And so we may see, whereas 10, 15 years ago, we may have seen somebody, quit their sport after their sophomore year. Now we're seeing them get support and help and continue. So we don't really know necessarily the numbers and all that sort of stuff. But so I think that the conversation around it, though, has really come from the students. If we look at like the Student Athlete Advisory Committee, the SAC, even at a national level, they have been talking about mental health for 5-6 years or more as a huge need for student athletes. And also you have, and I should know this, but I don't know, but in the past 10 years, Brian Hainline has become the chief medical officer or the wellness officer for the NCAA, chief safety officer. Dang it, what's his title? But he has done so much to prioritize mental health among athletes, and that has really elevated the conversation to where funding resources get allocated to support those efforts, and now there's legislation that every member institution must have an identified way to meet the mental health needs that are brought to them of athletes. So I think the students have really led that charge, and it needed to happen, and I think now there's much more of a recognition that someone who is mentally healthy, or at least is getting a lot of support, is going to perform better in their sport. So now you have like a lot of people call them new wave coaches that are recognizing that, yeah, this is the deal. You got to be able to put your whole self on the court or on the field.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting you bring up new wave coaches and this like mini story you just gave of a sophomore quitting after their sophomore season. Like that's what happened to me. And a lot of it, looking back, I would attribute to performance anxiety and like being so scared to perform and like having the yips despite being completely able to do what I was asked to do. And so it's just one of those things where like now I'm passionate about it because I wish I would have known that it's cool to talk to you or cool to talk to someone or like just even to have a name for it. But when you have a really interesting background too, where as a licensed psychologist, but then also certified mental performance consultant, you're able to kind of maybe talk someone to get out of a little rut versus being able to assess someone who actually has something that maybe is genetic or something that they developed at a young age. How do you make that? I'm sure there's a lot that goes into it, but is it easy to kind of like distinguish the two and be like, hey man, you're fine. Like you don't have like a severe or chronic depression. You've had a few bad games.
So I don't know that I make the distinction. So well, and actually I do in terms of what you're asking specifically. Like, yes, there are times that I would say, hey, this is clinical depression and we need to, because that's going to inform treatment, right? But I think if I could take a step back and answer your question in a different way, we all live on a spectrum of mental health, and some of us go back and forth on that spectrum. But like, you have people that are not functioning at all because of psychiatric and psychological or emotional illness. whether that whether that's schizophrenia or a severe eating disorder or bipolar that's untreated or whatever it is. And then you have kind of this zone of you know functionality, that a lot of us fall into. Excuse me. And then you have this other side of the spectrum where, yes, they're having these typical daily, I had an argument with my mom, or like, my roommate gets on my nerves, but their big um, goal is to increase their free throw percentage or come out of the blocks cleaner or whatever it is. And things are going really well for them. And they're emotionally healthy and all these kind of things. So on that spectrum at any one given time, you can say, okay, this is where you are and we want to move towards this area. So I think, in my opinion, if you are struggling on the field, first of all, there's an interesting phenomenon. Whatever you're struggling with on the field of play, a lot of times, if not most of the time, that's what you're struggling with in your life. So performance anxiety, for example, a lot of times they're struggling in the classroom taking tests if they're in a harder class, or they're not so comfortable on a first date, or whatever it is. So a lot of times it's kind of pervasive because we're not different people when we're on court.
Right.
But then if you're struggling in your sport, you're going to be struggling personally because it's a big part of who you are, and it's going to be distracting and it's going to be upsetting. But if you're struggling in your personal life, in your emotional well-being, it's going to affect your performance. So they all kind of merge together. So, people that struggle with confidence or, fear, failure, motivation, whatever it is, these are life issues. So something kind of nice is when people bring me a life issue, like, I don't feel like I fit in with my teammates or whatever, then they'll cope with that and their performance will improve. But then also when people bring me, oh, I'm just really struggling on the court with this thing, then their life improves and they improve other areas of their life. So they're so intertwined. There are people out there that just do performance work and they do a good job and they keep the boundaries. For me, I want to be able to address the whole person and the whole experience. So that would be really hard for me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And I think it's really cool, the skill set that you have. And I want to come back to that spectrum that you mentioned. In a way, it's good that social media makes information more accessible. At the same time, I'm sure you see stuff and you're like, that's not how it is. But right. I saw a post that displayed the spectrum, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but it's like there's 1 to 10, and you might be prone to being a 3 to 6. And so then it's kind of like sliding that. So like when you are bad, you're not going to like a really bad place. It's more of like or a place you wouldn't necessarily want to be, but it's not necessarily chronic or severe. Mm-hmm. And so is that kind of like what you mean by that, where like there's a spectrum of really like really chronic, really bad, really severe, and it's like two sides to it, and you want to keep people in the middle as much as you can?
Well, I think I want people to be able to be where they want to be.
Okay.
So in terms of, some people, they want to be very aware of their day-to-day struggles, and that connects them with their humanity, and that's going to keep them more towards, maybe the struggle side of that spectrum. But then, other people want nothing to do with it, and I think that's fine. So it's really my job is to figure out where they want to be and help them get there.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. I'm not sure how to word this other than draw the analogy with someone who's naturally born really tall, or someone who's naturally born really strong or really fast. Like some of us are genetically predispositioned to be better physically. Does the same exist mentally, or like is it more based off of mental toughness that is picked up through childhood experiences? Does what I'm saying make sense?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think there's definite genetic predisposition to temperament, or I look at my two boys, and they are super young, and they are going to have very, very, very different emotional skill sets. I don't know that one is better than the other. I know that one wakes up happy and is happy through the day, and his whole goal in life is to make you laugh. Like, couldn't be, I don't know, he might go into some sort of record book for happiness.
Oh, wow.
Cheerfulness, I'll say. It's actually quite bizarre. So my other son is much more introspective. He wants to know why. He is worried about a lot of different things. And again, I don't know that that's one is better than the other, because there's definitely some gifts to being his my older son's like awareness and his sensitivity and his empathy. And there's some drawbacks to the happy-go-lucky, like couldn't be bothered by anything kind of mentality. So they're going to have different skill sets. That's kind of the way I think of people's natural emotional disposition. And of course, there are different environments that bring out different qualities, and for some people, I was listening to somebody share their story the other day of how their father taught them a lot of tenacity, persistence, and discipline, and that has led to a lot of success. So of course, there are environments that capitalize on different strengths and also expose different weaknesses. So yeah, I think that it's all nature versus nurture, man. No idea.
Yeah.
Chicken egg, like, yeah.
But I think what's cool about that, and maybe in a way like at least comforting to me, is knowing that whatever skill set I have psychologically or physically, there's pros and cons to it all. And I always use the analogy for baseball. It's like, if I am not a home run hitter, like I should not put my eggs in learning how to hit home runs. Like I should invest that into what I'm already good at so I can really amplify. Maybe it's speed or just like hitting singles. And so if my psychological disposition is to be really happy, like I shouldn't dive into stoicism, or you know what I mean, where
Right. Yeah.
you can really like amplify the gifts that you already have, and then you do what you can to shore up
Mhm.
maybe weaknesses. And so I find that as a really cool, I don't know, analogy, because again, there's so much like stigma and unknown about the mind. But when I'm working with that, so I'm a personal trainer, I'll work with people and like, all right, these are your movement patterns, like we want to get really good at them. Well, these are your thought patterns. We want to wire these in a way that is as healthy and as efficient as possible. Is that kind of how you look at it?
Absolutely. I mean, we know, like, there's a great book, Martin Seligman's Learned Optimism. People have a natural tendency to be, towards optimism or pessimism. Um, and, but you can learn to be more optimistic. It will always be like using your left hand, like you can teach yourself to write incredibly well with your left hand. And for some people, it's harder than others. But it probably is always going to feel more natural, and you'll always have a tendency in stressful situations, or if you don't keep it up, to revert back. But I think the question isn't is this a weakness or a strength? The question is it helping me or hurting me? Is it helping me? And then you get to define in what, like, is it helping me towards my goals, or is it hurting me towards my goals? I mean, maybe my older son wants to write some sort of award-winning philosophy book, so his introspection and kind of deep observations of the world is going to help him in that, you know but maybe he wants to, I don't know, join a circus, and it's probably not going to help him in that.
Yeah.
I don't know. So
Yeah, totally. I like how you phrase that, where it's like, again, it can hurt you or it can help you in whatever environment that you put yourself in. And so it's not necessarily that it's good or bad.
right.
I think that's an important distinction because, like, I know personally sometimes I'll be shy and I'm like, man, I wish I was like more charismatic in this situation. But there's other times where like that's really good. It just kind of depends on the situation where you are. And then I think everything always comes back to awareness when maybe something is out of balance.
For sure. And you get to decide. You get to decide. I mean, inherently shyness is not good or bad. It doesn't work for you in terms of what you want at that particular moment. And you can just, in the 10 minutes that we've been interacting, I know that you can break out of that and pretend to not be shy.
Right.
And it's just, is it working for you in that moment? And does it help you meet your goals? And you get to decide all that. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. You have a background in hypnosis that I kind of want to ask about because I find it really fascinating. I've read about it in books and seen, different YouTube videos on it. Obviously don't have a huge background on it, but I feel like what a lot of people have from hypnosis is they go to their senior, graduation trip. A few kids get hypnotized and they're like, all right, like that's hypnosis. But I know that there's so much more to that. Can you give a little bit of background on it?
So the type of hypnosis that most people are exposed to and scared of is stage hypnosis, and that's not what I do. What I do is clinical hypnosis. My view is that all hypnosis is self-hypnosis. So it's not something that somebody does to you. It's something that you engage in. It's a process that you engage in. So we have all experienced hypnosis. If okay, you're leaving your office and you go home but before you left your office, you got off a really intense conversation call, like phone call. And that's what you're thinking about. And you're so absorbed in that conversation and figuring it out and running it back through your head. And then all of a sudden you pull up at your house and you don't remember oh gosh, I meant to get milk and I wasn't even present enough to realize I needed to stop, right? I mean, that's happened to all of us. That's hypnosis. Having relaxed and focused attention and being absorbed in such a way that your unconscious takes over. You didn't need to be consciously aware of your drive because your unconscious knows what's best for you. Your unconscious will get you where you need to go. It may forget the milk, but it gets you there, right? So that is the unconscious. So there's one of the big myths is that somebody's going to hypnotize somebody and make them do X, Y, and Z, kind of like the Manchurian Candidate stuff or whatever. In hypnosis, you can't actually be made to do anything that you don't actually want to do. So when you see people on stage that are under hypnosis, it's often called trance. There's something about them that they unconsciously want to, wear a feather boa and dance like Madonna. Like they want that because it's liberating, it's funny, it's fun, and they want to participate or whatever. But it's our conscious thought processes that don't allow us to do that. So when you relax and to a very deep level where the unconscious has is receiving the information, then it's really easy to remind the unconscious what would be helpful. Is this making sense?
Yeah, no, totally. It's almost like hypnosis takes down this invisible conscious gate and allows the subconscious to kind of go roam in the field.
For sure. So imagine that you are you're a pitcher and you go out there and you're new to the team, and it's a team you have dreamt about being on for your all of your young life. And but right before you went out to pitch in front of this new team, the pitching coach said, I didn't recruit you. I don't think you're that talented. So I think this is a waste of time. Let's see what you got. No pressure, right?
Yeah.
Most people would not perform well under that. However, if there was a way that you could eliminate the conscious thoughts about what was just said to you and allow your unconscious to take over, because your unconscious knows how to pitch. When your unconscious is pitching, that's the best performance you will have, is when you allow your body to do what it has trained to do over and over and over again. And then you allow it to receive the feedback from that last pitch to adjust the course, right?
Is it similar to flow state?
Yes. So you feel confident because there's no reason to not be confident, right? So that is hypnosis. Flow is kind of in there in a complicated way, but so that's what's happening. It allows us to address some of these fears that develop in our conscious mind, our hesitation, our doubt, our self-destructive behaviors that emerge because our conscious will not allow us to, or our unconscious has had those develop because of some sort of protective mechanism, and the unconscious can be reminded that we don't need those now, for whatever reason. So it's really helpful. I think, people say, oh, I can't be hypnotized, or there's a lot of myths around that. The reality is that you'll either allow it to happen or you won't. And it does take a lot of trust and willingness to be able to let go of those guards. But the worst that could happen if you try it is you get a nice relaxing nap,
Yeah. Yeah. No, I would love to do it.
Yeah.
Because I feel like I would be open to it. I would trust it. And
Yeah.
again, I'm just picturing like letting the gate down and all the cattle and horses just like go ham in the fields now. So that's
Yeah.
what my subconscious wants to do.
It has a lot to do with identity.
Mm.
So how do we see ourselves? Because I really believe that how we see ourselves really dictates how we move through the world.
Could that almost be like the conscious fence that we have around our subconscious is our identity?
Yes. So, one of the things, and I don't do this typically, but, a lot of people will go seek out hypnotherapy to quit smoking, for example. And the first task is to find out whether you really want to quit smoking or not, because there's a difference between wanting to quit and wanting to want to quit. And you can work from whatever place, but if you start from I want to quit and they really want to quit, then you're not going to get very far. But one of the things that you challenge first off is, every moment that you're not, engaged with a cigarette, you are a non-smoker. And so embracing the identity that you are a non-smoker, and anytime you start to smoke, that's the aberration. Because our activities are, as as an athlete, our activities are wrapped up in our identity. You are a baseball player, and that filters everything that you take in and everything that you do. So being able to, your unconscious over time, we really adopt some bullshit ideas about who we are. I don't know if I can say that.
Yeah, no, it's fine. That's the best way you can put it.
Yeah, I mean, just bullshit like I'm not enough, or I'm not capable, or I can't handle this, or if I'm not successful, or I have to be successful because without the starting spot, I am not worthy, or whatever it is. And the unconscious can be reminded that that's not the case, and that it needs to have a little bit more of a say when those ideas come in.
Yeah, totally. Do you ever have a hard time with athletes thinking this is woo-woo and, kind of like fluffy or spiritual, or do you find it a little bit more open to it?
I think that, it's interesting, like, hypnosis for me is not an activity, it's more of a conceptualization. And it's also kind of embedded in the way that I talk. So I'm doing it. I'm doing it all the time. That sounds so creepy, but when I say something, when I suggest something to an athlete, like, and hypnosis never comes up in the conversation, but I'm like, well, I wonder if you could start to take some risks in that area, or I wonder what it would be like to just be curious about how you do in the weight room.
Is that almost similar to NLP?
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
it is, and but it's a lot easier. It's a lot easier to hear. Like, I wonder what it would be like to be curious about how you do in the weight room. Than if I came directly and said, "Hey, listen, here's what you need to do. You need to let go of expectations and stop thinking about all the things that you want to accomplish in the weight room, and just wonder what's going to happen." Like, right? Like, that's not as easy to hear than I wonder. Like, I'm just curious what it would be like to have a different take. And so that language around it is speaking to the unconscious because it's an invitation. And when I make like, give homework or make a directive, then because we are independent creatures, we tend to react against that and be like, oh no, so that could be really helpful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that. Even just in working and suggesting things to clients where it's like, I wonder what it would be like to read at 9 p.m. instead of be on your phone, as opposed
Yeah.
to like get off your phone, go to bed. You know what I mean?
Or when clients are like, I'm guessing again about your life, but like, oh, I can't lift that weight. And you're like, well, let's see how far you get. Yeah, it's just a suggestion, and um, but not confronting that, not like, yes, you can, right? Because they will be like, oh, no, who are you? I'm the expert on me, but being like, let's see how far we get.
Yeah, I love that. I'm definitely going to apply that. I want to come back to the identity because I think it's one thing that athletes especially have a hard time with, whereas maybe college, there is a finite, career that they're going to have. They're not going to play the next level, and they do have to shed that identity. And I know for me, I went from being a baseball player, shedding that identity for a few years, and then being like, wait, no, like I still am an athlete just because I'm not a college athlete or still playing pro. Like that is always part of my identity and the lens in which I view the world. How does that work go about where you shed part of the skin, maybe keep part of it? I don't know. I'm really curious.
So I think it's helpful. So I do work with a lot of athletes in this transition, you know, like spring semester of senior year or whatever, looking at, okay, you say, I'm an athlete, I'm not going to be an athlete anymore. Or there's less direct ways that people say that they're worried about that. And then to say, well, what is it? What is it that makes you an athlete? Or what is it that makes you a soccer player or a volleyball player? I know that this is one that dawned on me over a long period of time after I quit playing soccer, which I quit way later than I needed to, according to my body. But being able to say, like, you know what, when I think of an athlete, the things that I identify with are the love of a challenge and the wanting to push myself and the enjoyment of a really good sweat and the culture, or all that. I'm still all those things. And so in that way, how much is it going? You are still the person, right? What do you fear you're going to lose? Most of the time, people aren't worried that they're going to lose those characteristics. They're afraid they're going to lose the access to the expression that they've come to be comfortable with of that. Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
saying, well, I'm not going to be around a team anymore. I'm not going to be in the weight room anymore. It's like, okay, this is true. And so I believe that it's important to stop and grieve that loss because this is true. You are never going to be on that team again. You are never, maybe you're not going to be on any team again. Grieving the loss of what was, and then recognizing the need to find other ways to access those pieces of your identity you love. So I know I'm using me as an example. So I played soccer, and the camaraderie and the team atmosphere was really difficult for me to lose. And so now I work out at like those gyms that just have classes. Like I can't go to my gym and lift weights. I have to go to a class, it's like, and it's a, place where they do like have the pushing yourself and a challenge and always getting better and all that kind of stuff. And so that is one piece where that piece of my identity is fed, and then also looking at how, I built my career so that I'm part of a team. I'm part of the athletic culture because that was important to me. And it's not as important to other people. Some people genuinely, and I do too, miss the sport. And so finding another way to be involved,
Yeah, absolutely. I think
never the same.
I had a friend who put it a way where it's like you're not necessarily chasing a circumstance, you're chasing a feeling. And so when I think about that, like I've always enjoyed the element of competition, and like you might lose and you might win. So for example, right now I'm training for a marathon and my goal is to run under 3 hours. And it's like that's a really stretch goal. Like that's like trying to, and right now for me, win a national championship. I might not. There's a good chance that I might not, but just having something to work towards and put something on the line for is allowing me to have that same feeling as going to bat against someone in the ninth inning where like I might strike out and I might get a hit.
Right. Absolutely. And, it's kind of cool once you grieve that loss to be able to recognize the advantages of finding different ways to channel your, whatever the pieces of your athletic identity that you want to connect with, like, a year out after graduation, a lot of athletes are like, man, I'm doing this, this, and this to feed those parts of me. And I do not miss waking up at 5:30 in the morning.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. What are some of the, I guess maybe lowest hanging fruit's a bad term, but the most accessible things that you find a lot of your athletes use and find to be really successful, whether that's breath work, meditation, visualization? What do you use? What do they really like using?
Taking a deep breath, and I teach them how to take a deep breath. And I really, that is so easy because a lot of athletes now have a Apple Watch. And so how many times a day do you just miss the breathe thing?
Oh, yeah.
And so making a goal that once you will not dismiss it, once you will actually do it. And that's not dismissing it is so much easier than sitting down and doing it, right? So, everybody has available apps, whether it's Insight Timer or Headspace or like whatever. So breath work is box breathing, and it yields really quick results. People really like it. And so that's the first one, self-talk, because it is very common that self-talk, athletes just suck at it. Mm-hmm. They just suck, and it's weird, like it doesn't make any sense, right? Like you think about the best coach you've ever had and how that coach talked to you. Likely it was somebody, whether he or she was very challenging but also supportive. So they would say, you can make this, or you can do this, or go do like whatever it is. But they're not going to say, I never thought you'd be able to do that. Or what were you thinking? My God, you're stupid. Like the best coaches that you had that brought out the best in you spoke to you in a way that was constructive and challenging and expected a lot of you, but also believed that you could get there and tried to give you what you needed to get there. So why would you coach yourself in like an asshole? Like, why would you coach yourself? Because you can also probably, if you've been around sports long enough, you probably had a coach that you couldn't perform for because they were always insulting you.
Yeah.
So, like, stop that.
Yeah.
So self-talk is one. I'm really big on language. So helping athletes to change one or two words that they say, like instead of like, don't take your eye off the ball, like just changing it to keep your eye on the ball because it's a lot easier. And picking one or two things and changing it. So self-talk, language, breath work, imagery. Imagery is a hard one because athletes find it hard to do by themselves. So teaching them how to have a picture and to choose what they're going to do rather than just let it happen by chance. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So
100%.
picking a target in golf or, seeing the form that you're going to use when you come out of the blocks or whatever it is.
Yeah. We had a mental performance coach named Brian Kane at Washington State for my sophomore year. And one of the things I think he called it anchoring, but essentially at any given point, like you would go and find a point on the field and that would bring you back to the present moment. And then it also served as a way to, like you go back to a time when you knew that you were performing at a really high level, I guess would be a way of putting it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Well, I think that that goes into, mindfulness. And if you can teach being in the present moment with the breath, then that's a foundation. You can go a lot of different places, but
Absolutely.
a lot aren't ready to go there.
You brought up language, and it's funny because I was going to ask you about this, whether you brought it up or not, but in one of the podcasts you talked about yet, and I actually used that this weekend where I'm training for a marathon. I had to run a half. And I was like, man, I'm not done yet. Like I still have a long ways to go, but I'm going to get there. I have that belief. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because I find that such a positive, like a powerful frame to literally just, I can't do this yet.
Yes. So growth mindset by Carol Dweck is kind of the basis. It goes over a lot of the research on how that one word, it just, it denotes possibility, I think I'm teaching my 4-year-old that he's not allowed to say, I can't do it. And there's a lot of things that he can't do yet.
Right.
But I know he's going to be able to do it. So when he says yet, because he can say, I can't do it yet, he gets excited about continuing to try because he believes in it. He believes that he's going to get there, and it's just that one word. When somebody asks you, hey, have you finished that thing I asked you? What are you likely to say? No, you say not yet.
Right.
Because you want them to know that you're going to.
Because you're going to write that paper or turn in that piece of homework. Like, I just haven't done it yet.
For sure. But none of us feel good about like, hey, did you pick up that thing I asked you to? No. Like, that's awkward, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So why would we do that to ourselves and close out that possibility? Like, so I'm just really big on using that word and saying and instead of but, because and or but tends to negate anything that you said before. So those two words are really big, and is very powerful because it also continues a sentence rather than replaces a sentence. And, anybody that's had to apologize to a significant other knows you don't say, I'm sorry, but, you can't do that, like, because it makes it, you didn't say, I'm sorry. You just made a justification. So I'm really big on allowing the possibility, knowing that you're making progress towards something by using the word yet, and then, adding to your experience with the word and.
Yeah, I love that. It reminds me of when people are like, no offense, but, and it's like, you've already offended me. No matter what you say afterwards, like, you just offended me. Just stop right there.
Right. And so like you automatically go to a place of defense when you hear that. And that's when we talk to ourselves. So one way that I like to really impress on athletes is that, you know, you're not talking to yourself in a different language, or you're not a, you're not a different species when you're talking to yourself as when you're talking to somebody. So there are times that I'll have teams write down, okay, what are the things that you say to yourself? And I'll give them certain scenarios, like, or, if I know the team well and I know that it's okay, and sometimes I've even talked to them beforehand, I'm like, hey, remember when you missed that free throw, or you remember when you had that bad pass in the Georgia game or whatever it was. It's always the Georgia game. But, then what did you say to yourself? Like, what was going on in your head after? What was, your dialogue? And so I'll make them stand up and choose a teammate. And then I have them yell at that teammate.
Oh, wow.
Written down. And it's really powerful, because you would not be friends with yourself, if you talk to yourself that way.
Yeah. Writing it down, I find I love journaling and promoting journaling just because it creates tangibility. I don't know if that's a word, but it's a word right now. Yeah. It makes thoughts tangible, and you can see them. Like, I write down what I'm telling myself, and I'm like, boy, that's a lie if I've ever seen one. But it just is on loop in your head, and you start to believe it because it's playing like a radio station. And
sure.
I like that one. I don't know how I could do that with clients, but I'll get them in a mirror or something.
Yeah.
Really good one.
Or have them, like, it's risky. You got to know the client, but, I want you to turn around and go up to that person that's working the desk and say those things.
Yeah.
And then, oh, why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Well, why are you treating yourself that way? Right.
Yeah. Want to be respectful of your time, but I also want to mention like where people can find you. And I know you host the United Podcast and do a lot of great work with Hilinski's Hope and that family, and that's kind of what connected us. Before I have you like kind of promote it, I also just want to say, like, anyone listening to this is 100% cool, acceptable, and like the best thing to do to talk to someone and just open up how you're feeling, whether it's a friend, loved one, significant other, a professional like yourself. Just, I call it poking the hole in the potato. Like, you don't want to throw a potato in the oven. You got to poke holes in it. Otherwise it just can kind of explode.
Ooh, I like that analogy. I have not used that analogy, but I'm going to.
Got
you. Credit you, but
that's all right.
That's a good one. Yeah, I mean, it's really important. So the United Podcast has been such a gift to me, and I'm really honored to be hosting it. And it's some of the top sports psychologists in the nation, just talking about what we do, right? And so I think it's really it's geared for student athletes, but there's very little that we talk about that wouldn't be applicable to everybody, right? So I think one way that people can reach me is my Instagram is Rebel Sports Psych, and that's sport. So sport and sports psychology does not have an S. That's a big mistake. That's usually how you can tell somebody that's actually a sports psychologist from somebody that's claiming to be one that isn't, is they'll put the S on the end of sports, and there's not an S. So Rebel Sports Psych. And that is also my Twitter handle, if you will. And so those are two easy ways to get in touch with me.
Cool. And yeah, I'll definitely link to the podcast in the show notes. I like to end all these podcasts with a couple personality questions, so hope you got a couple minutes. So you just have like the hardest soccer practice, or like one of the hardest workouts ever. Like, what is your go-to food meal? Like, what if you could have just like one best meal ever, what would it be?
Oh man, I love like post-workout. So my favorite meal is sushi, but that does not sit well after a workout.
No.
My favorite post-workout is Smoothie King, which I also refer to as Self-Soothie King.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. A good smoothie is definitely very soothing. All right. Yeah. It is the last set, the last 2 minutes of work, and you get to put on like the ultimate pump up song, like your go-to pump up song. What's it going to be?
Never Gonna Stop by Ozzy Osbourne.
Okay, cool.
Or Fuel by Metallica, but Ozzy's usually the good choice.
Yeah, that'll get the people going. And then the last one, the It is Sunday evening. It is movie night. You want to watch the best movie ever. What are you putting on?
Oh man, Harold and Maude would be a choice. That's a good one. Um, I like all the Harry Potters.
Okay. Yeah.
Uh,
I'll be honest. I have not heard of Harold and Maude, so I got to look into that right
yeah,
now.
it's strikingly dark, but it's very very good.
I'll say this podcast is almost like my Rotten Tomatoes. I've found a lot of good songs and good movies through
Right.
what people say.
Right? Yeah. If I want to laugh a lot, Murder by Death is a good one. It's an oldie but goodie.
Yeah. There's a lot of new weird stuff on all the streaming channels now that we're all locked inside. I feel like they're just like launch the garbage, and that's what we're watching now.
Well, check out those two because they're cult classics.
Yeah, absolutely. Harold and Maude and Murder by what?
Murder by Death.
Okay, cool.
Murder by Death. It's got like Truman Capote and Peter Sellers and Peter Falk and yeah.
Cool. We'll check it out. Well, again, thank you so much for taking the time and coming on. I learned a lot. I know anyone that listens to this will learn a lot, and definitely, again, appreciate it. And stay safe during this crazy time.
You too, and thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right. Before I let you guys go, I just want to say thank you so much for spending the time listening to the conversation between Dr. Josie and I. As you can tell, we are both very passionate about mental health, mental performance, and getting the most out of whether it's the athletes that we work with or the clients that we work with. So if you enjoyed today's podcast and got something out of it, be sure and tag, as she mentioned, her Instagram handle or me, ideally, Paul_Klingen on Instagram. Let us know you were listening and leave a 5-star rating and review on iTunes. Helps me grow the podcast so I can continue to bring on different doctors, different professionals, different experts in this mental health, in this mental mastery landscape. Also helps me get on different athletes so that we can have these different conversations about what's going on inside the mind of elite performers. As I mentioned, if you have any interest in the Yoga Foundations or Yoga for Runners, be sure and check that out at downdogathletics.com. And if you are interested in more one-on-one or remote in-depth coaching, you can also check that out there. Fill out a submission form, schedule a call, and be more than happy to talk to you about your different goals. And of course, if you have any questions, be sure to email me, paul@downdogathletics.com. That's it. That's all I got for you guys. Go have an awesome rest of your day, and I'll catch you next time on the Down Dog Athletics Podcast.